Welcome to Poetober, a month of reading the dark, eerie, haunting, and macabre literature of Edgar Allan Poe. Alright, let me get out of this room. Alright, so one of the reasons I wanted to do this whole Poetober event in the first place is because I got this nice volume collection of all of his short stories and I believe his complete novel as well from my wife's grandmother. And I didn't really have a great reason to just kind of pull it out, and I thought October would be the perfect reason. And also, like many of you, I read Poe in middle school or high school, but I don't really remember him. I definitely didn't read it with the kind of intensity and rigor that I read most of my books now. So I want to revisit him. I'm also from Richmond, Virginia, which is where Poe spent a lot of his life. There's a museum there. I believe they keep his house as a museum or a place to visit. So for all those reasons, I thought now would be the perfect month to spend some time reading a bunch of his short stories and poems as well. So today, to kick off this whole reading event, I'm trying to figure out which story I want to start with. I don't imagine most of them are only, I think most of them are like 15 to 20, 30, 40 pages maybe. So I'll have to see which one I want to start with today. Okay, I stand corrected. They're actually very short. The Telltale Heart, it looks like it's only like 3 or 4 pages. Hop Frog is only 6 pages. And MS Found in a Bottle, I think, is about 7 pages. So I think what I'm going to do is read MS Found in a Bottle, which is a short story that he won a contest with. I think I'll read that one. I'll read The Fall of House of Usher. That one's about 13 pages. And then if I have time, I'll start The Telltale Heart. But let me read those first 2 short stories, and I'll give a little recap on my thoughts after I do so. Just finished up reading MS in a Bottle, and before I share my thoughts, I wanted to make an amendment to what I said earlier. He did win a contest, a weekly contest for the Baltimore Saturday Visitor, which was just a newspaper at the time. He submitted this story, it ended up winning, and he earned himself a nice $50 reward for that, which at the time was closer, I think, like $1,500 as I heard what it's compared to. So a nice little prize for this story. It's a quite short and enjoyable story. It has that classic sailor tale feel to it. And I think it works quite well because the perpetrator of this eerie feeling and this sense of danger throughout the work is the ocean, the force of nature itself. Because of its vastness, the emptiness, the potential for monsters and other kinds of ocean lore or sailor tales that surround the ocean, the mystery of it all and exploration, it serves as a great perpetrator of impending doom in the unknown. And so that's what we're dealing with. And the sailor sees this massive ship emerge out of the stupendous seas, the black stupendous seas, or this kind of vast emptiness surrounding him and his ship, which has been overthrown essentially by a storm and dismembered the whole crew that was there. So now it's just him and this one Swedish guy. And he sees this massive ship emerge. And once he boards it, it's very much reminiscent of the Flying Dutchman, where the crew is speaking in this kind of very foreign and ancient sounding language. The whole crew looks decrepit and old. And I think he describes the skin of the members as, he says here that their skin was shriveled and their eyes glistened with the rheum of years and their gray hair streamed terribly in the tempest. So you have this, again, ghostly type of crew. And I also felt that the way that the ship emerged out of nowhere, it reminded me of the idea of phantom islands, which are essentially these islands or land masses that sailors will find that they can never revisit. Their location is never expressed. Sometimes these islands either never existed, or by the time that people try to, again, find that location that they were, they're either consumed or dissolved in some certain way. So it kind of reminds me of that. It reminds me of like the Bermuda Triangle type of eeriness going on there, and kind of mystery with that. But eventually the ship, they continue to go southward until they lead into a whirlpool that consumes them. So a couple themes that I guess come to mind with that, other than the Flying Dutchman, other than that kind of ghostly feeling and the vastness of the ocean and the fear that surrounds that, because I definitely have that fear of being lost at sea, is that idea of exploration, continuing to kind of pursue southward, because at this time they were still doing a lot of polar explorations, and that's what's kind of references is going towards potentially towards the South Pole, is that constant push for exploration kind of ends up consuming them. So perhaps something going on there. Otherwise, I'm reading too far into it. But I'm gonna probably crack into the fall of the House of Usher, and then I have some work I need to get to, and I'll probably wrap it up and finish that story later this evening, and then share my thoughts then. I finished the fall of the House of Usher last night, and this one definitely was a little bit harder to follow, but a much stronger and compelling visual story. You really get to see how Poe's prose not only shines, the structure, but really the imagery that he can evoke through his description, and how it creates and establishes this eerie feeling, this kind of haunting imagery that he's kind of quite known for. So I want to read a few passages, and then I'll give my kind of general thoughts at the end. So this is in the first paragraph of it. This is quite a long sentence, but I think it's a great example of his writing. Quote, "I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house and the simple landscape features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon a few rank sedges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul, which I can compare to no earthly sensation more properly than to the after-dream of the reveler upon opium, the bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart, an unredeemed dreariness of thought, which no goading of the imagination could torture into aught of the sublime." So immediately into the story, the narrator that we're following is looking over into this House of Usher, the house that currently who presides there is a friend of his from childhood, Roderick, and he looks at the house, and immediately it gives him this ominous feeling, this feeling that something is bound to go wrong, that there's some kind of decomposition going on within the house, the people within it, even every little brick or every stone is slowly decaying and falling apart there. So then later on, just 2 pages later, once he's in the house and speaking with Roderick, it says, quote, "An air of stern, deep, and irredeemable gloom hung over and pervaded all." I mean, even when he's describing the furniture in there, every little piece, whether it's a sofa, a lamp, whatever, has some kind of gloom or bad news written all over it, basically. And then he spends time with Roderick overall. I'm not going to explain the whole story, spoil all that. I don't need to summarize that. But later, what really sends it home is the shocking scene near the end, where Lady Madeline, who had passed away earlier, and he has this in a few of his stories. Lady Madeline, they leave her body for a few days, I believe, and then he has his friend who just showed up and already thinks the house is weird, has his friend help him in putting her body in this tomb. And then days later, as he's reciting this story or this tale to Roderick, they're starting to hear things in the house. Everything's like, "Oh, did you hear that? Did you notice that?" type of feeling. So I feel like this very much inspired a lot of those moments in horror movies that we all have come to recognize. And then there's the moment where Roderick is kind of going insane. He's like, "She's alive. She's in the tomb. She's still alive." And suddenly she shows up, her white robes covered in blood, the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame. And again, it's the highly descriptive language, the precision of imagery that I think Poe shines in, and why he's able to create such a dark, gloomy feeling across a whole short story, because it is the white robes drenched in blood, the enshrouded figure, the emaciated frame, these specific notes that really give us a clear sense of what's going on in the heightening moment where Roderick is starting to get really uneased and is starts talking to himself or rambling on and on. We get a sense of insanity or mania going on there. So interesting story. It didn't blow me away or anything like that, but today I think I'm going to read The Cask of Amontillado, which I feel like of any of the stories I have a faint memory of from school, but maybe I'm confusing it with a different story. And then Hop Frog, which is definitely a stranger short story from what I know about it. So I'm gonna read both of those and then I'll report back. All right, Cask of Amontillado, classic revenge story and plenty of spooky elements throughout. So a lot of the scene or the setting of the story takes place in the catacombs in this fictional town in Italy, and it's very reminiscent of, and even mentioned within the story, of the catacombs of Paris. So the lines, the ceilings, all of it is lined with skulls and skeletons. So you just have this again ominous feeling that death is incoming at any moment for these two individuals. So who are the individuals? You have the narrator Montresor, who his family was once had some kind of power, and he has been insulted by Fortunato. And in the first sentence, it just kind of sets it up. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. And as they're walking in the catacombs, he lures Fortunato down there with him because Fortunato has been drunk, and he's very much a connoisseur of wine. And so Montresor plays on his ego. He kind of lures him in. He says, "Oh, I got this Amontillado. You gotta try it. I need the tongue of an expert like you to appreciate that and give me his thoughts." Lures him down there. They're heading through the crypts, and at some point, Fortunato asks, like, "Oh, what was your family motto again?" And it's in Latin, so I don't know exactly how to pronounce it all, but it translated, it is, "No one has insulted me with impunity." Which kind of tells you where the story's headed. So it's another case of immurement, where he basically throws on the shackles and locks Fortunato down there. No one can hear him. No one's ever going to find him. And actually starts sealing up with masonry and layering bricks, sealing him down there to just die. And so very similar to the last story I just spoke about, the fall of House of Usher, where they had put Lady Madeline down in a tomb as well, while she was still presumably alive. So a little bit of that going on. I think that's a common theme in a couple of his stories. And what is creepier and scarier than being buried alive? I know that is something that frightens me almost equally as much as that first story of being like lost out at sea or just being in the middle of the ocean and no land in sight. So both of those things definitely common in Poe's writing. Now I'm going to read this Hop Frog story, which I think will be a bit different than the past three I've read. And before I finish the story and give my thoughts, I want to shout out two YouTube channels that are also participating in Poetober. One is Alex over at Analysis with Alex, and the second one is Emily over at the Linguist's Library. So check out their channels because they're going to be making similar videos. I don't know if they'll do a vlog style, and it's very likely that they'll be reading some different poems and stories that I'm not covering in this video. So I know I'll be checking out their videos, and I recommend you do so as well. But for now, I'm gonna finish this Hop Frog story. All right, so I'll make my analysis on the Hop Frog story pretty simple. It's a revenge story, much like the last one, but from a much more clever or witty standpoint, where you're following Hop Frog, who is this dwarf who is utilized as the jester for this king. And he's also, when he was brought along to the king, he was brought along with this other girl who's a dwarf as well. The king not only insults and just uses Hop Frog to laugh at him, mocks him, makes him drink this wine to entertain his friends, but he also hits Tripetta, the other dwarf, and Hop Frog takes great offense at this. And he contrives this plan and again plays on the ego and the amusement of the king and says, "Oh, I have this clever idea, but I need 8 people." And he goes, the king's like, "Oh, well, it's me and my 7 peers right here." And he talks him into playing as these orangutans that are supposed to kind of scare or surprise the masqueraders at this party that the king is putting on. And they layer themselves up with tar. And after they kind of do their little bit, basically, and scare some of the party goers, Hop Frog then enacts the real part of his plan, where he strings them up because they're all chained up. He strings them up, ends up lighting them on fire, and they immolate in front of the masses as Hop Frog and Tripetta escape and leave. So a cruel and venomous way of enacting revenge on the king. There's also a bit of this anti-authority or those in power bit going on here. There's again that theme of revenge. And it's important to note that Poe came from, well, both his parents died very young in his age, to where he's basically orphaned as a child. He was then adopted by a very wealthy landowner in Virginia, which is where he gets the name Allan, Edgar Allan Poe. And despite having this wealth, though, he ends up living most of his life in poverty because he is such a recalcitrant youth and basically pisses off Allan so much, and all of his failures at the different colleges he would go to or when he enrolled in the military, that Poe is basically left alone to himself. And also because of his drunkenness, which is a bit overstated at times, supposedly from what I hear with his biographies, is that he was very rational, very nice and pleasant guy. It's just that once he had a drink, there was no going back. He would fall into this state of erraticism, basically, if that's the word, erratic passion and crazed mindset and brashness and anger and rage and all of that he's somewhat known for. And so he had a lot of enemies. He lost a lot of jobs because of his alcoholic abuse and all of that. So he had a lot of probably wants and desires for enacting this revenge, enacting upon people that are in higher positions than him, especially in the literary sphere, where he felt like he should be the one getting some kind of glory or having a higher position at the magazine or at the newspaper, I should say, board and all of that. So a little bit of those things I think are put into these stories, but I believe that is the last short story I plan to read, and then I'll be dissecting some of those poems tomorrow. So that's the plan. Correction, I have to read The Telltale Heart as well. So I'll read The Telltale Heart tonight, and then I might even start getting into the poems tonight as well. I think most of them are quite short. So I have The Raven, Annabel Lee, and one other one, and then I have The Telltale Heart. So that's what I'll be reading tonight. Alright, so last night I read The Telltale Heart along with the 3 poems. Starting with The Telltale Heart, it's a very short story. It's only like 3 or 4 pages, depending on, of course, what edition you're reading, but it's a very short story. And it's kind of simple and straightforward in the idea that it is a psychopath who gets this fixation in his head to kill this older man. He sneaks into his home, kills the man, hides his body. Then eventually when the cops or detectives are coming around, he feels this pressure and confesses his guilt. Now, what's going on there? There's obviously a lot more there. There's the components of somebody creepily sneaking into your home and watching you. There's the inner dialogue and almost like schizophrenia going on in the first paragraph, where the character is saying, true, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? So he's already questioning. He's like, what are you saying about me? Am I mad? Am I insane? What makes me a madman? And he says that he can't be a madman because he still has some control of his senses. They've been dulled, but not destroyed. And really, this is the kind of interesting part to me, is the ending specifically, because he carries out this murder quite efficiently. He seems quite competent with how he wanted to go about this murder, taking care of it, making sure there was no witnesses, and hiding the body throughout the house, dismembering it and hiding it throughout the house. And specifically when the cops come, or the authorities come to interview him and question him because they heard a shrieking noise, he's very... he's quick on his feet. You know, he's very sly in the way that he talks to the officers, and he's literally, his chair is seated upon the planks, which the body is underneath, is what he tells us. And he does this all quite calmly, and he's cool like a cucumber, until he starts hearing this ringing noise. And the ringing just gets louder and louder, and he tries to talk louder and faster and try and make it go away. And at some point, he just can't handle it anymore. It's louder, he's losing his mind. And I'm sure there is probably a more specific diagnosis for this psychopathy that maybe you guys could point out in the comments, but to me, it's not guilt that is eating at him. It's not some kind of guilty conscience that's eating at him. To me, what I suspect is this ringing and this pressure that's building up in him is the never-ending pressure that he has now put on himself to keep up this secret, to continue to live this life either on the run or knowing he committed this murder. To me, that's what's eating at him. It's not guilt, and maybe it's not that, but I'm pretty confident that it's not just a sense of guilty conscience or some lingering goodness in his heart that's bothering him. It is some kind of discomfort with the circumstances, and probably just a state of schizophrenia. Again, he mentioned before he even committed the murder, he was terribly nervous and just kind of unsure of himself. So that's essentially what I got out of this story, was that the character by the end of this could not live with this state of disquietude or this raving and madness that was going on in his mind, that was just eating at him and driving him mentally insane. He just couldn't keep his composure and follow through with it in the end. So anyway, that was an interesting story. And then the poems were interesting, and they were all very distinct. So I read The Raven, Annabel Lee, and Tamerlane. They were all very different, and I think they were all written at different stages of his life as well. Tamerlane, I believe, was very early on, and Annabel Lee was published posthumously. And I'm guessing The Raven was published kind of in the midst of his prime, if you want to call it that. So that maybe is the explanation why they're all quite different. But of the three, I really enjoyed The Raven, which is what I read first. It just had a very nice flow, and I really like the use of repetition, because in the beginning, to kind of summarize what's going on, is you have this character who hears some kind of noise or some kind of tapping going on outside of his door, and he already has this sense of just this unnerving feeling, and it ends up being this raven at his door, and the raven essentially represents death and loss, specifically of his beloved Lenore, this woman who has passed away, this woman, this maiden that he had loved. And the narrator is depressed and in this state of unease or distressed state because of his longing for his beloved Lenore. We see this as well with Annabel Lee later on, which I'll get to, is this theme of longing or love that transcends someone's death, that is kind of never quelled, that discomfort and that pain is never quelled. But you have the repetition early on where he says, this is nothing more, this is nothing more. It's just tapping and nothing more, but it ends up being this raven. And so he's using this refrain to kind of calm himself. But then later towards the end, the raven is saying over and over, evermore, 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 like kind of like a parrot. And it becomes more unnerving and more frightening the more and more the raven continues to say this. So it's kind of use of repetition to soothe and then to disquiet or add some kind of state of perturbing the narrator later on. But there's also an interesting usage. Of course, you have plenty of rhyming going on in this poem, and a nice kind of, I feel like these are all meant to be spoken aloud. I guess that's just how poetry is always best done, is read aloud. But specifically poems like this, I think I had to kind of say it out loud, I feel like, as I was saying it, just because it has just such nice rhythm, and you don't get that if you're just reading it in your head. At least you don't get it in quite the same way. But along with that, one thing I did notice is this, I believe it's called susurration. So it's different from alliteration. It's this kind of, you get these S kind of sounds back to back to back that make this not just a flow, but it kind of makes this whisper type noise. So it just adds to that eerie feeling. So for example, in this line here, in the silken sad uncertain rustling each purple curtain. So silken sad uncertain rustling. So you have this, all that S's going on there. But overall, very interesting poem. Again, I enjoyed this one the most. I feel like it was quite there was symbolism going on there. It required some thinking and some connections, but it was also not too enigmatic in the way that I felt like Tamerlane was, where I guess all poems, very new to poems for the most part, I guess all poems, they do take multiple reads, but when I first read Tamerlane, I felt like I wasn't fully grasping what was going on. Perhaps I wasn't as locked in focus-wise, and it was only upon going like back to that first stanza that I was like, oh, obviously I get what's going on. I get how this all connects. So Tamerlane is more a story of this regret, where This individual is seeking glory, seeking pride. He wants to seize this kingdom, and he ends up sacrificing his young love for this. He ends up giving up his woman, and he ends up later regretting this and having this pain, just this kind of last deathbed type of regret or confession to himself going on here. But one section I really loved, I'll read it out, is I'll just read this whole stanza. What though the moon, the white moon, shed all the splendor of her noon? Her smile is chilly, and her beam in that time of dreariness will seem. So like you gather in your breath a portrait taken after death, and boyhood is a summer sun, whose waning is the dreariest one. For all we live to know is known, and all we seek to keep hath flown. Let life then as the dayflower fall, with the noonday beauty which is all. You know, after reading that, I don't remember if that was the stanza that I actually even really wanted to read, or if that was what was coming to mind. I knew I should have written down my notes on this, as I did for some of the other ones. But either way, there you go. There's a recitation of a bit of Tamerlane. Now the last one, Annabel Lee, super short. It seems obvious to me, but it isn't confirmed in any way. Scanning across the old Wikipedia page of who it was about, but it seems quite obviously about his wife Virginia Clem, who was it's a couple questionable things about that marriage. Specifically, it was his cousin, and probably worse so, she was 13 and he was 27 when they got married. So, a lot of red flags going on there. But he speaks of Annabel Lee, and specifically you see the, I was a child and she was a child. So you see some of these references throughout there. So that's why I say there's this connection to Annabel Lee. And also if I'm looking down, sorry, I had the poems on my phone, so I looked up PDFs because I don't have the old written copy. So that's why I keep glancing down here. But it's a very beautiful poem. It's another representation of this longing, this pain for a woman who has passed away, his beloved who has passed away. There's this imagery once again of the sea that we saw with MS in a Bottle. But within this you also have, again, that repetition of my beautiful Annabel Lee, my Annabel Lee, my Annabel Lee, of the beautiful Annabel Lee. So that kind of repetition there to really hone in on that name. And it also makes, again, a very beautiful poem when read aloud. And you have a little bits of imagery, again, of angelic vibes going on here with heaven, with angels. So a little bit of these elements added to it, of this transcendence, this love that transcends life, or this material life that we have here. So overall, what is there to say about Edgar Allan Poe and his writings after I read him? Well, I'll say one thing is this book is a chonker, and there are so many short stories in here. He was a prolific short story writer as well as a literary critic in his day, and reading, what was it, 4 or 5 short stories and 3 poems doesn't quite do him justice. So perhaps this is a book event I revisit next year. But it's been fun to read it, of course, with October, being in the midst of October and seeing people have decorations up all around, and we're starting to watch these, creepy, eerie movies and haunting movies again. It's nice to see where a lot of this came from. Another important aspect, too, that I was thinking about while I was reading this was I haven't read much Gothic. Now, I'll correct that. I haven't read any Gothic literature. I haven't read any Gothic literature, anything around this kind of time period. So I don't have much to draw upon as far as, oh, that's what connection he's making, or that's what he inspired, or how some of his works were seminal in that way. I can't make any kind of expert analysis on that, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But I do find his stories quite compelling. I think he was a bit ahead of his time, or maybe right in the midst of the time where writers are starting to have these very psychologically deep and confused and complex and raving type of characters and personalities. I know that Dostoevsky read a bit of Poe. I believe that's right. If it's not, I'll put it on the screen and blast myself. But I'm pretty sure he actually did read a bit of Poe. And I know Poe influenced a lot of writers. Perhaps, I don't know, I can't say that was his bigger impact, was the influence he made rather than the works themselves, because the works are the influence. But it is fascinating to see how many writers take a lot of, or give a lot of homage to Poe for the things he was doing, the ideas he was having, the characters and the settings, and how he was, his writing style overall. So I don't have too much more to add to that. I hope you all enjoyed this video and are reading some of the stories yourself. They're all quite short, so it's not a big ask to read some of these stories. So yeah, I think I'll wrap up the video there. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment down below your thoughts on Poe, or if you have a favorite poem, a favorite story, or if there's something I just blaringly missed here. Let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you all in the next one.